Hey everyone, Jimmy here, just quickly asking you to hit the notification bell and the like and subscribe buttons before we start. Also, don't forget to drop a quick comment saying where you're listening from, since this really helps my video out in the algorithm. Imagine a material that defies its own nature. For millennia, glass has symbolized clarity and fragility, a beauty waiting to shatter. Now, step back nearly 2,000 years to the volatile heart of the Roman Empire, specifically the reign of Emperor Tiberius. A legendary lost invention, known as vitrum flexile, or flexible glass, promised to overturn this fundamental reality. If this invention was real, it would have been a technological marvel that would have instantly destroyed the global market for everything from bronze cups to silver dinnerware. While this may not sound like a big deal, as you're about to see, the implications of this would have been incomprehensibly massive. By the 1st century AD, Roman glassmaking had already revolutionized daily life, particularly following the introduction of glass blowing. This innovation allowed for the mass production of high-quality glass objects, ranging from utilitarian oil vessels to ornate vases. Yet, all this glass was inherently brittle, ensuring constant market demand for replacement goods, supporting a robust and thriving industry. Flexible glass, conversely, would have been an economic weapon. The story of its creation and subsequent annihilation provides a chilling look at the conflict between radical genius and conservative state economics. The core narrative of this incredible invention comes to us primarily through two contrasting classical sources. The most vivid telling is preserved by the Roman writer Petronius, who described it as a Greek invention. Though the inventor remains frustratingly anonymous, he was a craftsman skillful enough to secure an audience with Tiberius. The inventor arrived, carrying a drinking bowl fashioned from his new material, ready to showcase his revolutionary creation. The dramatic demonstration provided by Petronius speaks volumes about the material's properties. After Tiberius examined the unique glass, the inventor dramatically hurled the cup onto the stone floor with all his might. The result wasn't the expected explosion of sharp shards, but a muffled thud. The bowl had merely been dented. To further prove his point, the craftsman calmly retrieved a small hammer from his toga and used it to tap the glass back into its original perfectly smooth shape. This demonstration suggests a material that was both shatter-resistant and highly malleable. Writing slightly later, Pliny the Elder, in his comprehensive Naturalis Historia, also recorded the story, but he expressed profound skepticism. He noted that it was a rumor that was more widely spread than well authenticated, indicating his skepticism about the invention. The climax of the story, as told by Petronius, reveals the economic anxieties of the Roman state. Confident in his success, the inventor stood before the emperor, likely expecting lavish rewards for gifting Rome a new, indestructible luxury good. Instead, Tiberius posed a fatal question. Did anyone else know the process? When the craftsman swore he was the only man alive who possessed the secret, Tiberius had him executed. Pliny's version offers a slightly less brutal outcome, suggesting the emperor merely ordered the entire workshop shut down. Regardless of the inventor's exact fate, the secret was intentionally and permanently suppressed. Tiberius's motives weren't born of petty cruelty, but of cold fiscal calculation. The emperor feared that flexible glass, a material that could be produced more cheaply and would last indefinitely, would devalue the price of commodities like bronze, silver, and gold. If this flexible glass could be mass-produced, the Roman economy would, in essence, be completely upended. If goods never wore out, demand for bronze, silver, and gold would collapse, destabilizing prices and elite wealth. By eliminating the inventor or shutting down his workshop, The state preserved economic churn, ensuring people kept buying, replacing, and spending. This was a critical concern, as Roman currency, particularly the silver denarius, was directly tied to the perceived intrinsic value of these precious metals. His financial policies aimed to maintain strict fiscal stability and preserve the purity of the coinage. Introducing a new material that threatened to replace the metals underpinning the currency system was seen as an existential threat that would trigger massive market destabilization. Of course, this understanding requires us to accept that Tiberius had a pretty strong grasp on the concept of supply and demand. Romans didn't have supply curves or demand curves, but they had an understanding of how abundance and scarcity impacted prices. By removing one of the main practical uses for precious metals, it's almost certain that Tiberius or his advisors would have understood the monetary implications of this. If the story is true, we have to consider what the inventor possibly made. Standard Roman glass was natron glass, consisting of silica, soda, and lime, materials that were robust but brittle. Modern scientific theories propose that the craftsman might have stumbled upon an early form of borosilicate glass, the shatterproof material used today in high durability items. If you're trying to picture what this looks like, imagine a glass oven dish or a durable glass measuring cup. This process would require incorporating boron trioxide, which could have been sourced from natural borax or boric acid deposits. But the materials themselves weren't the real issue here. Creating this glass also requires extremely high temperatures, exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. Notably, this process wouldn't be invented until 1884 by a German chemist using modern scientific and engineering techniques. Historians suggest that achieving and maintaining such extreme heat consistently in ancient furnaces presented a monumental technological challenge. This has led many to assume the invention must have been either a fluke of genius, a process impossible to consistently replicate, or that the story just simply wasn't true. If the tale is true, had Tiberius chosen innovation over preservation, Rome could have secured a unique trade advantage with its neighbors, at least for a time. Ultimately, though, when one looks at the tale rationally, it's easy to see why he feared this invention. While the initial fervor for flexible glass may have been immense, the only buy-it-for-life consumer goods at the time were made of precious metals. If this was replaced by a cheap glass product, this seemingly small invention may have crashed out the Roman economy. The art of manufacturing Tyrian purple stands as one of history's most fascinating chemical and economic puzzles. It was the ultimate visual manifestation of wealth, divinity, and absolute imperial power. Yet the story of this majestic hue, extracted from humble sea snails, begins not with glory, but with a powerful, almost unbearable stench. Imagine the city of Tyre in ancient Phoenicia, the coastal hub that gave the dye its definitive name. The industry was so foundational to the region's identity that the Greeks eventually labeled the territory Phoenicia, a designation translating directly to the land of the purple red. The dye's origin story was suitably legendary, linking its discovery to the Phoenician god Melkart. According to the story, while walking with the nymph Tyros, he watched his dog bite into a murex snail, staining its snout a brilliant, shocking purple. Despite this divine mythology, the reality of production was profoundly earthly, even repulsive. The industrial sites were notorious for their potent, enduring odor, which contemporaries likened to rotting garlic. This odor arose because the manufacturing process required the intentional decomposition of tens of thousands of mollusk glands. This contradiction, the production of the world's most sublime color through a foul, rotting process, provided a natural, effective barrier to entry for competitors. The powerful smell necessitated that the workshops be located outside city walls or positioned strategically downwind. This physical isolation was crucial in allowing the Phoenicians to maintain their trade secret, establishing a near-total global monopoly on the product. In fact, the only other people who would produce it in any quantity were the Carthaginians, who started out as a Phoenician colony specifically from Tyre. The costly secret of the purple lay within the glands of predatory sea snails belonging to the Muricidae family. The logistics involved in extracting this material were staggering, requiring meticulous, sustained labor on an industrial scale. Ancient producers estimated that to yield a mere single gram of the pure pigment required the processing of anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 mollusks. To put this in perspective, this was only enough material to slightly color the trim on a garment. This staggering production ratio meant the dye was astronomically expensive, rendering it literally worth more than its weight in gold. Archaeological evidence confirms that the Phoenician dye makers pushed local Murex populations close to extinction in their relentless pursuit of the dye. This inherent scarcity and exorbitant price made Tyrian purple a strategic commodity, allowing the dye to function as a powerful, state-enforced class marker. During the height of the Roman Empire, the cost was staggering. 1 pound of purple dye cost roughly 150,000 denarii during Diocletian's reign. This was equivalent to approximately 3 pounds of gold, valued today at approximately $200,000. It is important to note that the most coveted shade of Tyrian purple wasn't the bright violet often imagined today, but rather a deep, iridescent, near-black maroon. Contemporary writers sometimes describe this as the color of dried blood on white clothing. The reason this was more coveted is that this deep dyeing process meant that more of the expensive snail dye had to be expended on a toga. It was a way to signal extreme wealth and very high social status in a way that any Roman citizen would instantly recognize. The Roman state codified this rarity through strict sumptuary laws designed to maintain clear distinctions between social classes. While senators were permitted a purple stripe on their toga, the wearing of a fully purple garment, known as the toga picta, was something much more special. It was initially reserved exclusively for triumphant generals, and later became the defining uniform of the emperor. Under rulers like Nero, unauthorized wearing of the color could be punishable by death. The ancient process, which constituted a sophisticated form of vat dyeing, involved several complex chemical steps. As described by Roman author Pliny the Elder, the freshly extracted glands were placed in lead vats containing brine and then subjected to slow heating over a period of approximately 10 days. Although Pliny's account was incomplete, it provided a framework for understanding the craft. Modern chemical analysis eventually confirmed the primary colorant is a molecule called 6,6-dibromo-indigo. This molecule is structurally related to common blue plant indigo, but its unique dark reddish-purple hue are due to the presence of 2 bromine atoms. Crucially, the pigment does not initially exist in the mollusk. It's generated from precursors, specifically tyrandoxyl sulfate, which is held in the glandular fluid. When the gland is excised and processed, an enzyme called purpurase initiates a cascade of reactions, removing the sulfate group to produce tyrandoxyl. For the dye to successfully bond with fabric fibers like wool or linen, the insoluble colored pigment must first be chemically reduced to a colorless, soluble form known as the leuco compound. The ancient dyers achieved this reduction by unknowingly leveraging microbial action. They employed fermentation, likely within heated, briny vats, to create the necessary alkaline environment and reducing agents required to dissolve the colorant. The intense stench that defined the production sites was, in effect, a crucial process indicator. Once the fabric was submerged in the colorless Leuco solution, it was removed and exposed to air and sunlight. This exposure initiated the final critical step, oxidation. The Leuco compound immediately transformed back into the insoluble 6,6-dibromo indigo, permanently fixing the deep purple hue to the textile. This careful control over reduction and oxidation explained the dye's supreme quality. The permanence of Tyrian purple was unmatched, and unlike many plant-based dyes that faded, the dye strongly resisted washing out and actually intensified in color upon exposure to light. This made a toga with Tyrian purple on it an investment that potentially increased in value over time. For over a millennium, the Byzantine Empire became the sole and dominant customer for the purple producers. For those unaware, this was the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, centered around the city of Constantinople. The imperial court tightly controlled and heavily subsidized the entire supply chain, restricting the finished material exclusively for coloring imperial silks. The concept of being born in the purple, being born to a sitting Eastern Roman emperor, cemented the dye's irreplaceable symbolic connection to the state. However, the economic structure supporting the art was inherently unstable. Due to the high production costs and staggering logistical requirements, the industry demanded massive, sustained state-level patronage. The demise of the industry was therefore not a failure of chemistry, but of logistics and finance. The first major blow to the process came when the Levant fell under Muslim rule in the 7th century, though the process continued onwards through trade for another 600 years. The system fully collapsed following the disastrous sacking of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. This is an event that severely depleted and fragmented the empire's financial ability to sustain the infrastructure. The subsequent smaller successor states couldn't possibly muster the vast financial resources required to pay for the dyes. The production knowledge was essentially lost when its singular, centralized consumer went bankrupt. The Empire of Nicaea became Byzantium's lifeline after Constantinople fell in 1204. By 1261, this rump state retook Constantinople and restored the Byzantine Empire, which never again reached the level of stability to fund the production of Tyrian purple. Further, it's been speculated that during this period, the knowledge of producing this snail-based purple was lost, since there was only one major consumer of the product to begin with. Today, chemists can synthesize 6,6-dibromo indigo relatively easily and at a minimal cost. The synthetic molecule is identical to the natural pigment, with 1 gram costing less than $1. At present, some people do produce historically accurate Tyrian purple in extremely small quantities. The only catch is that if you want a kilogram of it to use for your dyeing projects, it'll run you approximately $3.5 million. The history of the founding of the city of Rome doesn't begin with a cornerstone laid by wise men or a treaty signed by equals. It starts with a shadow cast by a kindly wolf and ends in a pool of fraternal blood. It's a spectacular origin story that sets the stage for an empire founded on divine favor and absolute ruthlessness. This is the tale of Romulus and Remus and the Palatine Hill, where the world's most enduring political entity was supposedly born in 753 BC. The myth of the foundation, passed down through the ages by oral tradition and later written down by historians like Livy and Plutarch, was a deliberately constructed political tool. Its genius lies in how perfectly it overlaid a grand narrative of destiny onto the messy, complex reality of Iron Age village consolidation. A city destined to rule the Mediterranean couldn't settle for humble origins. The early Romans greatly admired the ancient Greek world, so they created a historical and cultural link to that heroic past through the figure of Aeneas. Aeneas was the Trojan warrior who escaped the destruction of Troy, sailed west, and settled in Italy. By tracing their line back to him, the Romans asserted a profound cultural legitimacy, claiming their place as successors to the greatest civilizations of antiquity. Importantly, the Trojans were a group that were wiped out as a political entity, likely allowing their cultural mantle to be adopted more easily than from another surviving group. This lineage was critical. The twins, Romulus and Remus, weren't immediate descendants of Aeneas. They were born centuries later to a woman named Rhea Silvia, who was a Vestal virgin and the daughter of a king in Alba Longa. To further bolster their claim to destiny, the twins were allegedly sired by the Roman god of war, Mars, who was crucially important in the early Republic. When the twins were infants, their usurping great-uncle, King Amulius, had them abandoned. Their survival in the wild, famously suckled by a she-wolf and later discovered and raised by the shepherd Faustulus, was interpreted as a sign of divine favor overriding human malice. The iconography of the she-wolf nursing the twins became, in fact, one of the most recognizable and widespread themes in Roman art. The twins grew up as ordinary herdsmen living a simple tribal lifestyle, but with an inherent knowledge that they were the main characters of the events that were going to unfold. As the boys grew, displaying remarkable bravery and strength, they eventually uncovered their royal heritage, overthrew Amulius, and restored their grandfather Numitor to power. With their royal lineage restored, Romulus and Remus decided to establish their own city near the spot where they were saved. They enjoyed widespread popular support because despite their royal lineage, they were also simple herdsmen themselves. Their immediate disagreement, however, was fundamental. Romulus favored the highly defensible Palatine Hill, while Remus preferred the nearby Aventine. Unable to resolve the conflict through debate, they agreed to seek divine approval through a contest of augury, watching the skies for auspicious birds. The augury itself was a point of contention that perfectly reflects the tension between nascent law and raw ambition. Remus claimed to have seen 6 birds first. Romulus countered that while Remus saw them first, he himself saw 12, a greater sign of divine favor. The resulting quarrel showed that even sacred rites were immediately subjected to political interpretation. Romulus declared victory on the basis of having seen more birds and proceeded to define the sacred boundary, known as the Pomerium. They began construction of his wall around the chosen Palatine Hill. This ritual act formalized the crucial transition from a collection of settlements to a defined city. The tragic climax of the myth arrived when Remus, showing contempt for Romulus's settlement and perhaps mocking the low, unfinished wall, defiantly leaped over it. This was a catastrophic violation of the Pomerium, the symbolic, sacred, and legal perimeter of the Roman state. Romulus reacted by cutting down his brother where he stood, establishing the ruthless principle that the state's security, law, and boundaries supersede all else, even kinship. This myth of fratricide functions as a powerful explanation for Rome's future strict legalism and militarism. It wasn't a tragic mistake baked into the founding narrative. It was the required sacrifice to sanctify the state's boundaries and centralize authority in the founder. The message is inherently clear. The Pomerium, the city itself, is more sacred than anything, even the family unit. This doctrine was necessary to justify the extreme civil control and military discipline that characterized the Republic and Empire long after the Roman kingdom fell. Romulus, having established his rule through this ultimate crime, went on to found Rome's institutions, government, military, and religious traditions, reigning as its first king. It's tempting to believe these tales were treated as historical fact by ancient people, but even the scholars who recorded them didn't. Roman historians themselves were acutely aware that they were narrating poetic tales. Livy, the monumental historian who preserved much of the foundation narrative, stated openly that he could neither affirm nor refute the legends surrounding the founding. He recognized that while there were likely grains of truth scattered throughout the tale, he didn't have the tools to find out what those were. The true geographical anchor of the myth is, without a doubt, the Palatine Hill. While the story of the twins is legendary, modern archaeological investigations of the Palatine offer crucial context and remarkable confirmation of the location's significance. Excavations prove continuous human occupation of the hill, dating back much further than 753 BC, possibly as early as the late 10th or 9th century BC. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of a small Iron Age hut village on the Surmalis peak of the Palatine, precisely the spot where tradition places the mythical founding. These were simple, primitive structures, oval or oblong in shape, built with wooden poles, beaten earth walls, and roofs of interwoven branches or thatch. The best preserved of these dates to the late 9th to 8th century BC. The specific location of these trenches and post holes, indicating the village's existence, aligns perfectly with ancient literary sources. The most compelling point of convergence between myth and material memory is the Casa Romuli, or Romulus's hut. This specific location was venerated throughout antiquity. Ancient accounts mention that the site was meticulously spared from later monumental construction, and the hut was continually restored to maintain its primitive form. This profound respect for the location proves that the Romans retained a powerful, accurate physical memory of the community's nucleus, even if the founder himself was fictional. The myth is, therefore, a sacred narrative built around a genuinely ancient, revered geographical location. The conventional mythical date of 753 BC, though fictional, isn't arbitrary. It falls squarely into the period of the Iron Age when the various hilltop settlements were demonstrably expanding and coalescing into a proto-urban center. The time around the mid-8th century BC represents not the founding of the first settlement, but likely the political unification of previously independent communities. Furthermore, the central conflict of the myth, the wall and the pomerium, is also validated by the ground. Archaeological traces, sometimes referred to as the Murus Romuli, suggest the existence of an early wall or defensive earthwork surrounding the Palatine summit. This confirms that the action that led to Remus's death was based on a real, necessary act of defense and demarcation undertaken by those early Iron Age communities. It may even be a cultural echo of a real event that happened at some point during the slow founding of the city. The tale of Romulus and Remus is a masterwork of narrative engineering, but despite this, there's more truth to the tale than educated ancients believed there was. It successfully condensed centuries of gradual growth, political conflict, and defensive consolidation into a singular narrative beginning in a specific year. While the specific tale of Romulus and Remus is a fiction, the archaeological evidence proves that it contains the kernel of the true story of the founding of Rome. In the end, it's a perfect illustration of how civilization isn't merely built on stones and bones, but on the powerful stories we choose to believe about ourselves.